For eons, our planet has drifted as a lonely space traveling through the universe, and for a brief moment, we have been its passengers. Thus begins the narration for this cheeseball of a ride in Epcot Center, one that takes us on a journey through human history, seen through the lenses of the progress we've made on the grounds of communication. And a lot of what you see in that ride has a certain subtext to it, and it's that, although as a species we are well aware of our own mortality, we still strive to build a future for generations to come. We take for granted that 100 years, 200 years from now, the human species is still going to be around. And though it seems that some of us are oblivious to the fact that we stand upon the summit of millennia of human progress and sacrifice, as a species, we still build our future upon the legacy of our ancestors. But what if this lonely space traveling through the universe had its days numbered? What if we knew for a fact that there is no future ahead of us? And what if we didn't have a past? What if the past were a distant memory of something that happened to someone else? What if there were a video game bold and brave enough to ask these questions? Well, that one I believe we can answer. Welcome to Ye Olde Entertainment. My name is Alex, and as you know, it is my duty, my mission, my purpose in life to help you decide whether that game that you have been thumbing for so long is indeed the right game for you or not. And today we're going to be talking about Colony Ship, the aptly labeled post-Earth role-playing game. Because just like post-apocalyptic themed games explore the prospect of a world that has been almost completely annihilated, Colony Ship paints the picture of a world that has left Earth behind, a world that hardly recognizes its earthen past as its own, a world in which its people are for the most part hopeless about the future and live on a day-to-day basis, trapped not in a colony ship, but in the trap of the time being. And as you know, I review games according to a system of categories that I think are relevant to the genre of the game at hand. And Colony Ship is a classic RPG for classic RPG fans, and it features turn-based combat mechanics. And when it comes to those, character creation and character progression are up first. This is one of the most fulfilling character progression systems we've had in a long time. We've said it before and we'll say it again. A character progression system is only as good as the freedom it gives the player to experience the game in his or her own terms. And Colony Ship's character progression system delivers in spades. Not that I expected anything less from Iron Tower, the guys who also gave us Dungeon Rats and The Age of Decadence. Well, like in many other respects, Iron Tower outdid themselves in the character progression end of things with Colony Ship. You start your character creation journey with this proper character creation screen that draws its fair share of inspiration from the OG Fallout games, which is always a very good thing. First, you are asked to allocate stat points to some attributes, and the game does a fine job of explaining the importance of each of these stats to the various approaches you might want to go for in this game. Hovering your cursor over the charisma attribute, for example, tells you that this stat determines how many party members you can have. And if you look a little bit further down, you'll see under the derived stats section that it also modifies combat stats like your neural resistance. Then you're asked to tag a few skills and some skill points. Tagging a skill makes it prevalent. It's the one thing you're going to be specially good at. Skills are adequately categorized in combat, science, speech, and stealth. And these categories pretty much define the different approaches available for you to get stuff done in Colony Ship. And then you have feats that allow you to further hone your character to your preferred approach, and these might have a retroactive impact on your skills. If you choose the gifted feat, for example, you get 3 additional stat points and 4 additional skill points. Questing is the most important aspect of Colony Ship's gameplay mix. Everything else you do in this game, combat, social interactions, manipulating computers or electronic gadgets, and stealthing around, are things that you do with the ultimate purpose of getting shit done for other people. And the game's character creation and progression system effectively allows you to decide which of these things you're going to be good at. And as it happens in The Age of Decadence, there is some proper opportunity cost attached to every decision you make in this game. Becoming good at something in Colony Ship automatically entails sacrificing, well, being good at something else. And this translates into high quality replay value. During my first playthrough, while the game was still in early access, I decided to go down the gunslinger path. and I ended up engaging in some pretty tough, pretty cool gun battles. But whenever I felt like talking someone's ear off, I ran into the wall of just not being good enough at it. During my second playthrough, I decided to go down the path of the charlatan, so I went hard in the paint with persuasion, streetwise, and impersonation skills. And I feel like I ended up playing a completely different game. During my first playthrough, I felt like the game was a little too combat heavy, but the second time around, I was rarely forced to pull out the lead spitters. And I was having a blast talking everyone's ears off and getting them to do what I wanted. But I eventually got struck hard with the truth that physical violence is the most paradigmatic form of power, which means that at some point I had to accept an outcome that I did not want at all because I could not convince someone whom I also didn't have the means to coerce into doing what I wanted. This was frustrating, of course, but also fascinating because to me, it felt like a prime example of opportunity cost, and this is one of the pillars of the RPG genre for me. Take this situation for example. Your party needs to go to this door, and there are some scavengers on the way who won't let you pass. You can stealth around them, you can fight them, or you can persuade them. Since I was not very good at stealth or combat, I convinced them to let me pass. And though I committed a healthy number of skill points to computers and electronics, there were some computers that I couldn't hack and some electronic devices that I couldn't operate. And I think this is great because RPGs should always have top tier stuff in each category to reward only the most specialized players. And believe me, there's not a chance in hell this particular computer is going to elude me the next time I play. I swear it. In the character creation screen, you get to choose your sex with a proper sex selector, which I think is how it should always be. You can choose some portraits, all of which are very cool, and you get to customize your appearance a little bit. These customizing options are nothing to write home about, but this is mostly an isometric game, and there are no fancy cutscenes, so I don't think it's that big of a deal. Once you're done choosing what your character is going to be like, it's time to choose who you are going to be in the world. And you do this by answering a few questions about your background. And right out of the gates, you can tell that these guys don't take storytelling lightly. These background screens of the character creation interface are absolutely killer because they nail three things. First, they tell you all you need to know about the setting in which the story takes place, thus sparing you the boring information dumps that usually take place over the course of the game in most RPGs. Second, they cast the spell of immersion on you before the game even starts. And third, they get your role-playing juices flowing like nobody's business. This is how seriously the game takes its writing and your character's background. When asked about the revolution that some of the big players in the game use as their philosophical leitmotif, you can answer stuff like, revolutions have never lightened the burden of tyranny, they have only shifted it to another shoulder. Or, we cut off one Hydra head, yet 3 more took its place. Next time, we'll do it right. And you also have the non-committal answer. The farther away they all stay away from you, the better. And when asked about your views on religion and the Church of the Elect, you can choose from answers as divergent as, religion is the opium of the people. Or, it doesn't matter if God exists. People need to believe in something bigger than themselves. Or, faith has always been mankind's greatest strength and defining trait. We must preserve it at all costs. Or, honor he who was reborn, and you too shall be reborn in the new world that awaits at the end of our long journey, come the dawn. One of these screens tells you about a faction called the Brotherhood and about their agenda. The war goes on, it says, but it will be fought on a different battlefield with different tactics. A non-military campaign to win over the people through reason, weakening the enemy from within. That is the central pillar to this new strategy. And one of the options available for you to remark upon the Brotherhood's plan is, he who fights monsters should look to it that he himself does not become a monster. Yes, this game even throws Nietzsche in for good measure. This part of the character creation process gave me a really good feeling about what was to come in the writing department. I could already tell that these writers weren't all hell-bent on selling me their view of the world or taking sides with any of the in-game factions that I was surely about to encounter. And it ends with an interesting and encouraging disclaimer. Actions speak louder than words. And this is to let you know that while these answers might serve to establish some people's initial reactions to you, you can still shape your character and have an impact on how people see you through your actions in-game. And this is exactly how it should be in my book. If I had to level some criticism at the character creation system in Colony Ship, I would say that skills do have synergies with other skills under the same category, but this is not explained on this screen as it is, for example, in Underrail, and there is no way for you to make the most out of these synergies other than actually choosing this or that dialogue option during conversation sequences. But this is of course a very minor nitpick that takes nothing away from an otherwise impressive character creation and progression system. Gameplay. Gameplay in Colony Ship consists of questing, combat, and exploration. Questing is the marrow of the game to the point that almost everything else feels accessory to this aspect of the gameplay. And I think this is perfect for a story-driven classic RPG. Quests in Colony Ship are exciting and filled with stakes, and all of them do for the game what scenes do for a good movie. See, every scene in a movie should serve to advance the plot, or tell you more about the world in which the story takes place, or about its characters, and ideally, it should do all three things. And this is exactly what quests do in Colony Ship. Everything you do in Colony Ship serves to tell you a little something about the idiosyncrasy of the ship's inhabitants, or the ship itself. Moreover, there is always something important at stake, and the game does a brilliant job at escalating the stakes in a way that feels organic and believable. Your first task is to explore a previously unexplored area of the ship's armory, which is a fitting task for a lowly noob like yourself. But from then on out, one thing leads to another and you end up, well, being instrumental to the ship's various factions and groups. You know, Fallout style. Combat is turn-based and it uses an initiative system. Most combat encounters are the result of a conversation not turning out the way you wanted, or a failed stealth check. You just don't walk to people and shoot them because this game has essential NPCs. That's right, you can only fight those people the game expects you to fight. This isn't Fallout or Baldur's Gate. It is very heavily scripted, and that involves essential characters. I don't much care about this, but I know some of you like your freedom to extend to, well, being able to kill anyone anywhere. At the beginning of every combat encounter, you can position your characters however you wish in the available starting spots, and you can use some non-offensive skills and items like shields and distortion fields. Initiative is important in this game. Some companions like Evans are natural glass cannons, and you want to make the most out of their skills as soon as possible. Combat encounters go from generic to ridiculously awesome, but the latter tend to be first, very difficult, and second, avoidable if you're good with non-combat skills. You have a lot of consumables that can turn the tables of a combat encounter, as well as different gadgets and a surprising array of weapons that have different skills. Itemization is really good in this game. Not only do you have different types of weapons like assault rifles, machine guns, shotguns, pistols, etc., but all of them have a hatful of characteristics that make them unique. There are, for example, different types of rifles. Assault rifles have different types of burst attacks and can be fired several times before you need to reload them. But then you have sniper types of rifles, which have to be reloaded after every shot, but take less AP to reload, have greater accuracy, range, and damage per bullet. You also have gadgets that you can enhance with different components. You have shields, for example, which absorb or mitigate damage. And there are different components that you can use to upgrade shields so that they can take more damage or regenerate faster depending on the component you choose. There are even some armor pieces that have built-in gadgets. I also like that almost every combat encounter happens as a consequence of a story-related event. I've always found this to be the best way to elevate combat in games that don't particularly have great combat systems, like Expeditions Rome or Shadowrun Hong Kong, both of which have serviceable combat that feels gloriously epic because of the stakes involved story-wise. And I feel like this is pretty much the case with Colony Ship. There are even a couple of very exciting fight for your lives or it's time to take the fight to the bad guys types of situations. And most of these are crowning moments for some of the most intense plot points. There's also an arena kind of place, a court, in which you act in the name of the prosecutors by shooting the bad guys who are also armed in the courtroom. This is the only concept in the game that I found a little bit too over the top, but it was pretty fun, so I'll give it a pass. Exploration and colony ship feels great for two reasons. First, the ship's design is amazing. It's varied and elaborate, and accessing some of the places requires you to dance around a series of obstacles. And second, most of these obstacles have to do with skill checks, which make every location you gain access to feel earned, like a reward for investing your skill points and those of your companions properly. It also helps that there's always an interesting quest-related reason for you to visit these places, and many of them aren't even mandatory. On to the negatives then, of which I think there are a few. Like I said, this isn't a game in which you can do whatever you wish, however you wish. You can't sneak up to someone you don't like, plant some dynamite in his pocket, and sneak out without anyone being any the wiser. You can't pull out a gun and shoot at someone that you know you can't convince from the comfort of a carefully selected vantage point to avoid being overrun by his companions, for example. In Colony Ship, the ways in which the player can get stuff done are dictated by the game, not by the player. And I know some people aren't going to be on board at all with this. But this isn't a good or a bad thing, it's just how it is. Colony Ship still has a great deal of replay value, and it comes from your character's build and the paths that you choose. I think this is high quality replay value, but you don't have the freedom you have in games like Fallout or more recently Baldur's Gate 3. I also think that being able to fast travel from anywhere in the game to anywhere else cheapens the adventure aspect of the game a little bit. The game is packed full with fascinating, intricate locations, and sometimes going back the way you came in adds to the feeling of adventure. But when you are given the option of circumventing backtracking altogether, it's easy to fall to the temptation of doing just that, and it can take a toll on the fun factor. Another issue that I have with the game is that the pace suffers a little bit once you reach the location known as the Habitat. This happens roughly at about 60% of the game. The Habitat is a place that grants you access to the strongholds of the various warring factions of the game, but I can't quite put a finger on what it was that made this part of the game drag for me. Maybe it was the fact that I've seen the trope of the conflicting factions fighting for supremacy way too many times in video games, and Colony Ship doesn't do anything particularly different with this trope. Or maybe it's the fact that the previous act focused on very particular objectives with very high stakes, and they were all more or less on the same trail, while the last act threw in too many locations with too many quests that felt a little bit less relevant. There is a plot point that marks the beginning of the final stretch of the game, and after this particular event, the game picks up the pace again and it goes back to being absolutely fantastic with high stakes, epic combat encounters, and an ending that I really didn't see coming. All in all, Colony Ship delivers on every aspect of its gameplay mix, but more importantly, it delivers on a key aspect of the RPG experience, putting the player in the driver's seat of the story. If you appreciate quest-driven RPGs, you can't go wrong with Colony Ship. Story and lore. This is the best story I've played through in an RPG since Disco Elysium. That should tell you all you need to know, but I know it doesn't, so let's talk about the game's premise. Taken directly from the game, it's the year 2754. You will never feel the sun's warmth under a blue sky, never hear the wind in the branches of a tree, and you will never swim in the ocean because you had the misfortune to be born on the ship. You have never seen Earth, you will never see Proxima Centauri either. Your past and future both sacrificed by dim and nameless ancestors to the greater good of the mission. Starfarer, they called her. A pretty name for a retrofitted interplanetary freighter. She had already been 20 years in service when she was rechristened and showing every minute of it. No one is certain the ship will actually reach its destination, and nobody much cares, since no one alive now will live to see it. Fatalism is the prevailing philosophy of the shipborne. Make the best life you can, and consign all your what-ifs and what might have beens to the void. The ship was launched with the purpose of establishing a colony on a distant world. The original 50,000 passengers were known as the First Generation. They were true believers in the mission. They sacrificed whatever lives they had on Earth, and they demanded strict obedience to the ship's laws from their children. But the generations that followed lacked their forebears' fervent will to make sacrifices. This lack of will turned into dissatisfaction. Dissatisfaction turned into unrest, and unrest evolved into an open revolt against the ship's authorities. This event later became known as the Mutiny, and it was so big that it eventually became a full-scale civil war. The mutineers dealt a decisive blow to the old order, but they did not eradicate it completely. So when the fires of war finally dissipated, three factions emerged from the wreckage of the old order: the Protectors of the Mission, the Brotherhood of Liberty, and the Church of the Elect, each of which promised their own version of the future. The ship suffered extensive damage during the Civil War, but remained operational. The hull was breached in several places, and clumsy efforts were made to prevent a complete meltdown. These efforts ended up crippling the main reactor, and as a result, radiation increased to lethal levels around many places of the ship. Following this incident, a small percentage of children were born with deformations. They were branded mutants and immediately shunned. The mutants eventually became an ostracized community within the habitat, but the conditions of the reactor worsened over the course of the years, and the mutants saw this as an opportunity to negotiate with the habitat. They would volunteer for maintenance and repair jobs around the areas that were most exposed to radiation in exchange for protection from harassment and violence. And that's the world you walk into once you are done creating your character. It's a world that has been around long before your time in the story, and therefore, there's a lot of history to it. And that's how I like my settings. In Colony Ship, you are a regular Joe who does small-time jobs for a small-time fixer named Tanner. And for anyone else who's willing to pay. Or at least that's how I played it. But one thing leads to another, and you eventually become involved with a big fish in the part of the ship that's known as the Pit. But even these guys are big fish in a small pond, and they need help from even bigger fish. And that's how you progressively work your way up to the big shot callers of the ship who worry about the big problems. But as you work your way up the ladder of business that needs to be taken care of in the ship, one thing becomes clear. Everyone here is caught in the trap of the time being. And it's because everyone feels powerless to change their futures. And they are not wrong. Regardless of which path you decide to traverse, you'll eventually meet the monks of the House of Ecclesiastes. This is a species of heavily augmented cyborgs who are in charge of the environmental control and life support system, which is located at the maintenance deck. The monks of the House of Ecclesiastes used to be regular humans, but when the mutiny broke out, the ship's CTO sealed the Environmental Control and Life Support System, or ECLSS, to prevent either side of the war from seizing control. And to further shield the ECLSS, the CTO used deep space technology to augment the crew members' bodies. These augmentations amounted to a fundamental reworking of the human body, giving them superior strength of body and mind and allowing them to live for centuries, but also depriving them of human emotions. With this transformation, the ECLSS crew would become what they needed to be, a group that is above the ship's passing struggles, devoted solely to its survival, at least according to the ship's CTO at the time. And this is where it gets interesting. See, there are two conflicting visions of the world, very broadly speaking. One that states that there are those who just know better, and because they know better, they should be the ones calling the shots in the name of all those who don't know better. These people tend to be allergic to concepts like democracy and consensus. They're always looking for ways to remove majorities from the decision-making equation, often using democracy to undermine democracy, and even the concept of free market to undermine free market itself. The other vision of the world states that everyone should be consulted at all times about every decision that affects them. People like these tend to be allergic to authority, even the authority that comes from knowledge. The monks of the House of Ecclesiastes are the ultimate shot callers in the colony ship. Everyone else is playing petty games of power over this or that area of the ship, but the monks couldn't give less of a shit about what people think or want. They believe they know better because they have been around for centuries, because they have greater knowledge about the ship's systems, and because they have been stripped of emotions, which allows them to approach all of the ship's problems in an unbiased and analytical manner. And I can see some of you invoking this or that philosopher and whipping out this or that quote in support of the monks' authorities, and some others saying, fuck this shit, I don't care how long these people have lived or how much knowledge they have. I am a ship citizen just like they are, and they aren't going to rule over me simply because they say so. And the most beautiful thing about this game is that the developers don't side with either of you guys, but they have paved every road that you might decide to traverse. And the best part is that they do acknowledge all of your decisions. See, ever since I played Fallout, I felt like a final succession of stills narrating what became of the world, its people, your companions, and your main character is mandatory. And Colony Ship does not disappoint in this respect. And the best part is the feeling that it could have turned out very differently if you had taken different decisions at the various critical narrative crossroads of the game. It's also quite interesting that none of the factions are too keen on consensus. Not even the ones who claim they are. Especially those, actually. So maybe you want to be the agent of that? I don't know. Another thing that I like about Colony Ship is that every NPC and companion seems to be the product of the ship's social dynamics and its history. Despite the fact that everyone in the ship is human and earthen, just like we are, none of them seem to display any of the mindsets that any of our current day social tribes seem to have. And I think this is quite remarkable, impressive even, because it must have not been easy to conceive a group of people whose past doesn't belong to them, and who are convinced for the most part that the ship won't be able to hold for more than 100 or 200 years, which renders the concept of a future completely meaningless. And yet, that's exactly how the citizens of Colony Ship feel, and the game's magnificent ending is as poignant as it is precisely because of how prevalent the theme of the trap of the time being is all throughout the game. Colony Ship juggles themes like authoritarianism versus libertarianism, external control locus and how it breeds resentment, and of course the trap of the time being. And it does so in a way that's mature and level-headed. It does not concern itself with any fleeting social talking points that we might have nowadays, because it's just above all that shit. And this is quite refreshing in this day and age, if you ask me. The game is also not lacking in humor, but it's not the goofy-ass situational humor that we get in most RPGs these days. It's dark and cynical, and it mirrors the people who live in the ship. If I had to level some criticism to the game's writing, I would say that the only thing holding this game back from being on the same level in the writing department as Disco Elysium is the fact that NPCs often seem to be there with the sole purpose of giving you something to do. In Disco Elysium, NPCs have lives and problems of their own, meaning their lives do not revolve around you and your quest, which is also fantastic as a subtext. In that sense, Colony Ship is a little bit fetch questy. NPCs conveniently have stuff for you to do that will yield experience and loot. And I think they could have polished your interactions with the various people of the ship a little bit more to make them feel like they have a life of their own beyond the quests they give you. Other than that, like I said, it's the best story I've played through in an RPG in a very long time, and certainly the best one to come out in 2023. Companions, Lorewise. The guys and gals who tag along for the ride in Colony Ship are pretty decent. Decent enough at least that I was left wanting more of them. They don't say much over the course of the game, but everything they say, A, is useful to the situation at hand, B, provides insight about where they stand on important issues and about their aspirations and personalities, or C, serves to paint a richer picture of what the world of Colony Ship is like. And I'll take it. That's all I want from my companions in an RPG. If I had to describe my companions in Colony Ship with one word, I would say they are lean. Meaning that you can tell exactly what each of their personalities are like, and what they want, and where they stand, even though they are not ceaselessly jabbering about their problems and their personal dramas. Evans is a cynical man who is very much trapped in the time being, just like everyone else. He isn't very fond of change, and he prefers the prospect of a strong unified authority, even if it's a tad too authoritarian. He's not crazy about any of the leaders, but he's loyal to those he serves. Jed is a practical and worldly man, who's been around and who knows who's who and what's what. He believes the prospect of the new world to be a fairy tale, and he doesn't much care about the world the ship's left behind. He is the very definition of a true neutral character. He's not crazy about the ship's authorities, but he certainly doesn't want chaos to take over either. Faith is the most hopeful and idealistic of the lot. She believes that there is a realistic chance that the ship will eventually get to the new world, and it's this hope that keeps her going. Beyond the area of the pit, she doesn't know what to expect, so she plays it by ear. And as different as all these people are, they don't antagonize each other over petty things. They are smart and mature, and they understand that they need each other. I like that your mission gives all of them purpose. They believe that they are making a big difference alongside you, for better or worse, and for all of them, this is a major upgrade, even if sometimes they are very vocal when they disagree with you about something. There are at least 2 other potential companions that I didn't recruit because my party was full and I was happy with my current entourage. This is not a game in which you collect companions as though they were trophies and have them sit around camp waiting for you to talk to them or to take them along for a mission, who also conveniently level when they are not in the party with you. If you like this BioWare/Baldur's Gate 3 approach to companions, that's okay, but no, that's just not how it is with Colony Ship. Like I said, this game takes opportunity cost seriously, and inviting some people to join your party means that you're going to be missing out on some other people's company. And I have no problems with this because I am going to play it a second time. If I had to level some criticism at my companions in Colony Ship, I would say that they could have been a bit more invested in the mission at hand. They all have companion quests, but they feel a little bit detached from the main mission. I also would have wanted them to intervene a little bit more, since every time they did, they brought pretty good stuff to the table. Overall, pretty good, but it could have been better. Companions gameplay-wise. This is probably the most interesting game I've played this year in this respect. While games like Dark Envoy really nail their cross-companion combat synergies, Colony Ship is packed full with non-combat challenges and skill checks of all sorts that you're not going to want to fail. And from the get-go, it becomes obvious that you won't be able to crack all of them by yourself. Each of your companions has initial proficiencies that you want to pay attention to, because you want each of them to play to their strengths. And if you play it smart with skills and feats to hone them to their specialties, you'll be able to cover pretty much everything. Thanks to Faith, I was able to crack open all of the game's locks and sneak around some of the game's challenges, and if it hadn't been for Jed, my party would have failed every strength-dependent challenge. Gameplay-wise, my party felt like a cohesive group that played to their strengths, and I found it very fulfilling that I could tick many of the boxes of the game's challenges because of how well balanced my party was. This doesn't exclude combat, in case you're wondering. The concept of tanking, for example, is very relevant in this game, and someone has to play that role. You also have DPS and support roles, and you better make sure that you have all of those covered. Combat synergies aren't as impressive as they are in Dark Envoy, for example, but giving your companions the right gear and choosing the right combat skills for each of them makes a world of difference in this game. Overall, I think Colony Ship is pretty darn good in this respect. Secondary mechanics and user experience. In addition to its core gameplay mix, Colony Ship has inventory management, trading, implant management, and item optimization, and all of these things are crucial to your long-term success. Money is valuable in this game and consumables are expensive and in short supply. Ammunition for energy weapons, for example, is tremendously scarce and super expensive, but energy weapons make a huge difference in combat encounters. And I do mean huge. And I think this is the perfect balance because you can't abuse trading mechanics to brute force your way through combat encounters. Some vendors have interesting items, and the best of them are super expensive as well. Over the course of the game, you find different implants that you can use to upgrade yourself or your companions. These implants synergize very well with their skills and attributes. You need components to fix them though, and those aren't easy to come by. There's also a limit on the number of implants that you can use on yourself and your companions, though this limit can be increased with a feat. And then there are some gadgets that you can upgrade in various ways depending on what you want from them. I like this cool little screen that adds a few quality of life features. You can group heal on this screen, you can automate some tasks like reloading after every fight, you can choose your specialists for every type of challenge you have in the game. It's cool. It's very modern gaming in the best possible way. I also like that there are little ad hoc secondary mechanics here and there, like being able to repair a robot that you can then send to other power stations to lend a hand with combat in some parts, or reaching a unique facility that allows you to create a specially powerful version of your drug of choice. The user experience is not bad when it comes to most things, but it's definitely not great when it comes to secondary mechanics. You can't compare weapons in your inventory to your secondary weapon. Developers everywhere...
You need to stop that.
This needs to be a thing in every game. Also, you can only buy stuff with your main character, and you can't switch characters while you're on the trading interface, which means that you cannot compare any of the items that are for sale with your companion's equipment. There is no quest tab, there aren't any filters, and there's only one auto sort criteria. And this isn't great, because there's a fuck ton of loot in this game. At least you have a common inventory and there is no encumbrance mechanic. And I will abso-fucking-lutely drink to that. Also, you can customize your keybinds in the control tab of the settings menu, but you can't change the default right-click to move configuration. Also, when you open some collapsible panels and during some loading screens, you can't move your cursor, and this sometimes gives the impression that the game froze. This is a minor detail because loading screens are really short, but I think it's worth mentioning. Overall, there's nothing game-breaking or excessively irritating, but there are a few issues to speak of. Sound effects and mix. To say that sound effects and mix are not Iron Tower's strong suits would be hell of an understatement. This game is almost mute, guys. The ship is a busy place by the looks of it. There are brothels, bars, and plazas where there are people walking about and doing stuff. But walk to a bar where there's people drinking and talking, and there is no rumor of people or the sound of glasses or cups. You can barely hear the sound of the neon sign of the establishment, and that's it. Take this factory for example. There's clearly some piece of heavy machinery hard at work here, and unless you stand right next to it, you won't be able to hear anything, and even then... Is this the sound it's supposed to be making? There is absolutely no verticality in the sound mix. Also, the sound effects themselves aren't very good to begin with. I guess a case could be made for the stark sonic landscape being an artistic decision, the lack of sound being an allegory of the emptiness and the general lack of purpose of the ship's citizenry. But was it also an artistic decision in Dungeon Rats and the Age of Decadence?
I don't believe that.
There are sounds to go with every combat action, but they feel kinda cheap and underwhelming, and sometimes they just don't sound like the action they're supposed to be for. Also, the music sounds like a separate layer that has not been mixed with the rest of the sound. It's like a layer that's lying on top of everything else. Overall, I was not impressed at all with this aspect of the game. Voice acting.
There ain't any.
And this is okay. I'm firmly in the camp of those who say you should go all in with your decision. It's either fully voiced or not voiced at all for me. Colony Ship is an example of the latter, and I'm perfectly fine with that. Music. If I remember correctly, there was only one track during the early access days of the game. They've added a full soundtrack since, and I think it nails the vibe and the mood they want to go for. And that last clip you heard has Western vibes to it, which I think is quite appropriate for the location at hand, in which people more or less live by their own rules. The rest of the soundtrack often sounds like the music is all hell-bent on being melancholic and Kafkian, and that's fine. But I think you can aim for these vibes and still sound futuristic and dystopian sci-fi like. And this soundtrack is not futuristic or dystopian sci-fi like. The music in Colony Ship sounds like it wouldn't be out of place in one of those Annapurna games like Stray or What Remains of Edith Finch. The soundtrack in Colony Ship is serviceable, but it doesn't go too far beyond that. Graphics. This is a major improvement over Iron Tower's previous games. The locations are the absolute standout of the graphic package. Most people inside the ship believe it has been drifting aimlessly through the universe for decades, and this is very much the feeling you get throughout the game's many locations. But also, this ship has everything from overgrown hydroponic facilities to alien-inspired dark maze-like control rooms to abandoned armories ripe for the scavenging, and all of these locations look like a product of their recent history. The citizens of the colony ship have stopped caring about the future, and the ship very much looks the part. Towns look lived in but not cared for. Mission control areas look like there was a mutiny not long ago, which was very much the case. The yellow and red areas around hydroponics look like they've been claimed by wild vegetation and fauna. The level design is intricate and it makes the exploration aspect of the game feel fulfilling. I am also quite impressed at how unique every piece of gear and weaponry is in this game. These are all pieces of gear that I wanted to try out, and they even look pretty cool on your characters. Character portraits are fantastic, and they really do nail the vibe of the game. I usually don't care much about my character's avatar, but I think this is the only game in which I couldn't decide who I wanted to be because I liked almost every portrait. The UI design has also been taken to the next level compared to what it was in the Age of Decadence. I think the game is a little bit lacking in the animation department. I mean, 26 years ago, Fallout featured animations for everything, from your character entering a manhole, to it spinning its gun cowboy style when it was just standing about, to mutants scratching their asses and smelling their fingers. In Colony Ship, your characters look at their weapons from time to time, and some characters have loop animations of them walking about or lifting cups to drink, and that's about it. Take this little sequence for example, in which you disable this turret. There could have been an animation of you reaching out to the console and turning the turret off. I don't think that would have been too costly or too complicated to do. Here's another example. Every time you climb a ladder, you get a fade to black transition and your characters appear at the other end of the ladder. While in Fallout, which again came out 26 years ago, you get a ladder climbing animation and the sound effects to go with it. The fact that we have almost no character animations beyond the very basic, and almost no sound effects, makes me think like the chaps at Iron Tower consider these things to be secondary in importance. And granted, people who take RPGs seriously don't pay the price of the admission for sound effects or animations. And though these things won't make the difference between a good and a bad game, they do make the difference between a great game and a game of the year, even in indie spaces, I think. Overall, I think the graphic package was great, but I think for future games, the devs should really think about putting a little bit more effort into those animation sprites of their characters. Performance and stability. I didn't run into any significant issues while playing Colony Ship, except the cursor freezing during loading screens and while displaying the content inside collapsible panels. There were no crashes to desktop, no noticeable FPS drops, and no glitches or bugs that I can remember. If it's not perfect, it's pretty damn close. Other considerations and final thoughts. Colony Ship is one of the best RPGs to come out in recent memory, and in my book, it's a solid contender for Game of the Year 2023, a year that was chock-a-block with amazing titles. It tells an amazing story, and it wraps it up with fabulous lore, and it delivers on key aspects of the genre like choice and consequence and opportunity cost. Combat is competent when it is at its worst, and very good when it is at its best, and exploration is amazing. It reins you in more than games like Fallout, Underrail, or more recently Baldur's Gate 3, but that's a trade-off you expect from an Iron Tower title. I still think these guys need to up their game in the sound effects and animation departments, and if they do, there's no doubt in my mind that they are going to be highly praised beyond the usual crowd of hardcore RPG fans. I thoroughly recommend this one if you are a member of said crowd. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, thank you for watching all the way up until now. If you like what you are seeing on this channel, please consider subscribing and clicking that notification bell to avoid the usual YouTube shenanigans. Come check us out on Discord if you don't mind all the boomer talk that goes on there. I personally love it and wouldn't change it for anything. Share the video if you thought it was cool, but most importantly, never stop gaming, but don't let gaming get in the way of your hopes and dreams. Bye everyone.